You cannot break a spirit that has already survived the worst storms the world has to throw at it. Join us for the epic tales of modern-day titans who rose from the ruins to claim their victory. Click subscribe now and find your own unbreakable spirit today. I didn't cry. I didn't pack a bag and fly home. I sat in my office at 11 at night, reading my brother's text for the third time. And I just said out loud to nobody, "Okay. Go ahead," because my plan was already running. Let me back up. My name is Maya. I'm 32 years old. I'm a licensed architect and interior designer, and for the last 4 years I have run a small but genuinely successful design studio out of a converted warehouse space in Portland, Oregon. I specialize in commercial interiors, restaurants, boutique hotels, creative office spaces. I built every single client relationship myself. I sourced every contractor myself. I painted the front door of that studio myself on a Sunday afternoon while eating a gas station sandwich because I couldn't afford lunch anywhere else that month. My brother's name is Derek. He is 37. He has never held a job for longer than 14 months, and for as long as I can remember, our parents have described him as the one with the vision. Derek has had visions for a vintage car rental company, a craft brewery, a streetwear brand, and most recently, a commercial real estate consultancy. Each vision lasted between 4 and 18 months before quietly disappearing. Each one was funded, in part or in full, by our parents who have a nice house in Beaverton, a solid retirement account, and a deep, structural inability to say no to their son. I was not the one with the vision. I was the one with the student loans, the business plan, and the 6 a.m. alarm. For a long time I told myself it was fine. I was doing well. My studio, I called it Groundline Studio, had earned real recognition. We'd been featured in 2 regional architecture publications. I had a wait list. I employed 3 people I genuinely cared about. My project manager, Renata, my junior designer, Cal, and our studio coordinator, a woman named Priya, who had been with me since the beginning, and who I trusted completely. The warehouse space I leased was unusual. It was owned by a local development company, and when I first signed the lease 6 years ago, I had negotiated something I was very proud of. A long-term occupancy agreement with a right of first refusal clause on purchase, an explicit language that prohibited subletting or commercial reassignment without written consent from both parties. I had negotiated this myself. I was, after all, an architect who understood property contracts better than most people who aren't lawyers. The landlord, a quiet man named Gerald, who collected succulents and seemed genuinely happy I was keeping the building alive, had signed without issue. I had also, at the time, run the whole contract by an attorney friend named Sophie. Sophie would become important later. The trouble started 14 months ago when Derek's real estate consultancy began to wobble. I knew it was wobbling because my mother called me every Sunday, and the calls had shifted from Derek is doing so well to Derek is going through a difficult season. The language of difficulty with Derek always had a particular shape, vague, blameless, tilted toward what other people might do to help. I helped. Of course I helped. I referred him 2 contacts in commercial real estate who I knew professionally. I had a long call with him where I walked him through his business model and gave him honest, careful feedback. I even offered to let him use our conference room for client meetings when he needed a more polished address than his apartment. That last one was a mistake. Derek came to the studio 3 times for those meetings. Each time, he spent a little longer. He asked questions about our lease terms. He complimented the space in a way that had a slightly appraising quality to it. Like he was measuring something. I noticed but didn't name it. I told myself I was being uncharitable. Then, 8 months ago, my parents called me together. That was unusual. They always called separately. My mother calling, and my father also being on the line, meant something had been discussed in advance. My father said that Derek had a real opportunity, but needed to establish a stronger physical presence for the business. My mother said the studio was so beautiful and clearly more space than I needed. My father said that Derek had already spoken to Gerald. I asked what that meant. My mother said that Gerald had mentioned my lease was up for renewal in 14 months, and that Derek had expressed interest in the space. I asked if Derek had told Gerald that the space was currently occupied by his sister's business. There was a pause. My father said that was something we could all discuss as a family. I said, "The lease is mine, the business is mine, the space is mine, until I choose otherwise." My mother said I was being territorial. I hung up, called Sophie, and told her everything. Sophie listened without interrupting, which is a habit I deeply respect in people. When I finished, she said, "Get ahead of this. Call Gerald today, and send me the lease." I called Gerald that afternoon. Gerald was uncomfortable in a way that told me Derek had already been in contact more than once. Gerald said that Derek had been very persuasive and that he'd mentioned the family relationship and suggested I might be willing to negotiate. Gerald also said, and this mattered that he hadn't agreed to anything, and that he respected our existing contract entirely. He just wanted me to know the conversation had happened. I thanked Gerald. I sent Sophie the lease. Sophie confirmed what I already knew. My occupancy was airtight. Derek could not touch it without my consent, and Gerald couldn't override it without breaching the agreement. For 3 months, things went quiet. I told myself maybe it had passed. Derek found another space, or the consultancy pivoted, or my parents had accepted the boundary. I got busy. We landed a significant project, a full interior redesign for a boutique hotel in Seattle. I was genuinely happy. Then, 5 months ago, Derek showed up at the studio on a Tuesday morning without calling. He was wearing a blazer. Derek never wore blazers. He had a folder under his arm, and the particular expression he's had since childhood, when he wants something, and has prepared himself to be charming about it. He said he wanted to show me something. He opened the folder. Inside was a rendering, a full-color architectural rendering of my studio space, redesigned as a corporate consultancy office. My workbenches were gone. My material samples wall was gone. The open drafting area I'd spent 3 months building out was replaced with a reception desk and glass-walled meeting rooms. His company logo was on the wall in brushed brass lettering. He said he'd had a designer put it together. He said the space had been wasted on residential-scale work. He said with the right rebranding, we could operate together. His consultancy would bring in commercial real estate clients, and I could benefit from the referrals. I looked at the rendering for a long time. I asked who had given a designer the dimensions of my space. He said he'd taken measurements when he used the conference room. I asked when he had planned to mention any of this to me, before having it rendered in full color with his logo on my wall. He said he wanted to present a complete vision, so I could really see the potential. I closed the folder and handed it back to him. I said, Derek, this is my space. The lease is mine. The build-out is mine. I'm not subletting, I'm not co-branding, and I'm not discussing this further. He said I'd always had a problem seeing the bigger picture. He left. I watched him walk to his car, and I noticed, even then, that he didn't look defeated. He looked like a person adjusting a plan. I called Sophie that night. I told her about the rendering. Sophie said, he's going to try to go around you. Don't wait for him to move. Send Gerald a formal notice of intent to renew right now, even though you're 14 months out. Get it in writing that he's received it. I did exactly that. Gerald responded within 48 hours. He confirmed receipt and confirmed my right of first renewal. I forwarded the exchange to Sophie and saved it in 3 places. 2 months passed. I focused on work. The Seattle hotel project was going beautifully. Renata had brought in a new hospitality client. Cal was developing into a genuinely talented designer. I let myself believe, again, that it had resolved. I was wrong. The call that changed everything came on a Thursday night. It was my mother. She didn't start with hello. She said, we sat down with Derek and a lawyer today and we found a solution. I said, to what? She said, to the space situation. Derek's lawyer found a provision. If a lease is inherited or transferred within a family under certain Oregon commercial codes, the original tenant's terms can be renegotiated with the landlord's cooperation. Your father and I are willing to co-sign the new arrangement. It will still have your name attached. I sat with that for a moment. I said, Mom. Who told Derek that? She said the lawyer had explained everything. I said, that provision doesn't apply here. My lease is a direct commercial agreement. It's not inherited or transferred, and Gerald has already confirmed he's not cooperating with any renegotiation. She said the lawyer had a different interpretation. I said, tell Derek's lawyer to call my attorney. She said I was making this into a battle when it didn't have to be. I said goodnight. I called Sophie. Sophie said, that provision either doesn't exist or doesn't apply. I'll research it tonight. But more importantly, your brother is now using legal-sounding language to pressure you, which means this is escalating. We need to document everything from this point forward. Here is what Sophie found. The provision Derek's lawyer had cited was real, but it applied specifically to residential leases passed through estate proceedings. It had no application whatsoever to an active, arm's-length commercial lease. Derek's lawyer either didn't know that, or was counting on the fact that I didn't. I knew it. I also knew, in that moment, that Derek was not going to stop. He had spent money on a rendering. He had hired a lawyer. He had recruited my parents. This was not a person who was going to be satisfied with a phone call. He was going to push until something broke, so I made a decision. I decided to let him push. Here's what I mean by that. If I escalated, if I sent a cease and desist, if I involved lawyers formally, if I made this loud, Derek would go to my parents and I would be the aggressor. He would be the wounded one. My parents would spend the next 3 years in the middle, and every holiday would carry the shape of this fight. I would win legally and lose the family in the wreckage. But if Derek took action, if he actually did something, then the record would be clear, and I wouldn't have to explain anything. The consequences would speak for themselves. So I called Gerald. I told Gerald everything. I told him about the rendering, about the lawyer, about the provision. Gerald was quiet for a moment and then said, "Maya, I want you to know I've also heard from Derek. He told me your family had agreed to a transition and asked me to begin drafting new terms. I told him I needed written confirmation from you first. He told me he would get it. I said, Gerald, I am telling you directly I have not agreed to anything. I will never agree to this. Please document that this conversation happened." Gerald said he would. He also said, and I noted this carefully, that Derek had told Gerald my parents were prepared to offer a significant cash incentive if Gerald cooperated. Gerald named an amount. It was not a small amount. I asked Gerald if he was considering it. Gerald said, "I've been in property for 30 years. I don't burn good tenants for cash. But Maya, if Derek believes I'm going along with him, he's going to do something. You should be ready." I thanked Gerald. I called Sophie. I told her what Gerald had said. Sophie said we needed to formalize our documentation with a time-stamped legal notice, which she filed that week. A formal declaration of my occupancy rights, entered into public record, stating clearly that any action taken to interfere with my use of the leased premises would constitute tortious interference and grounds for civil action. Derek didn't know about that notice. I didn't tell him. 3 weeks later, I got a text from Priya. It was a Saturday. She said, "Someone is at the studio. 2 men. I drove past and saw a van. I don't have a key today. Do you want me to go in?" I told her to stay in her car and send me photos if she could safely. She sent 3. One showed Derek's car. One showed a van with no signage. One showed, through the front window I had installed myself, 2 men with a hand truck moving my material samples wall. I sat with my phone for a long moment. My first instinct was rage. My second instinct was to call the police immediately. I have thought about this moment a lot since then, and I want to be honest about why I didn't do the second thing right away. Derek had a key. He had a key because 3 months earlier, during one of the conference room visits, he had taken a copy from the lockbox we kept for contractors. I didn't know this yet. What I knew in that moment was that I did not have complete information, and that incomplete information makes for incomplete action. I called Sophie. Sophie said, "Don't go down there. Call Gerald right now. Then call the non-emergency police line and file a report. Don't touch anything. Let them document." I called Gerald. Gerald answered on the second ring, which told me he had been waiting. He said, "I know. They contacted me yesterday and said you had given consent. I told them I needed it from you directly. They didn't call back. I'm so sorry, Maya." I filed the police report. I sent Priya home. I spent the rest of that day doing something that was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I did nothing visible. I let Derek do what Derek was doing. I also called every one of my active clients that afternoon and let them know we were temporarily relocating project meetings to my home office while we handled a facilities matter. Not one of them left. Renata handled the logistics in under 3 hours. Over the following 2 weeks, Derek gutted my studio. I know this because Gerald, who had, it turned out, installed a property management camera system after a prior tenant dispute, shared footage with my attorney. The material samples wall came out. My drafting tables went into a storage pod. Derek's brushed brass logo went up on the wall. A new reception area went in. He had contractors working 3 days a week. He also, during this time, began telling people in the local commercial real estate community that Groundline Studio had rebranded and merged with his consultancy. He used my studio's reputation, the reputation I had spent 6 years building, to schedule introductory meetings with 2 developers I had cultivated as leads for over a year. Those 2 developers called me. Both of them. One said, "I got a call from someone at what they said was your studio. I wanted to confirm." I said, "Please confirm with me only. The studio has not rebranded or merged. You will be hearing from my attorney." The other developer was more blunt. He said, "I've worked with you on 2 projects, Maya. Whatever is happening, you should know he used your name and your portfolio in his pitch deck. Using my name, my portfolio, without my consent, to solicit my own clients." I called Sophie and told her about the pitch deck. Sophie said, "That's a separate cause of action. Unfair business practices and misappropriation of professional identity. Add it to everything else." Now let me tell you what Derek didn't know. He didn't know about the public notice Sophie had filed. He didn't know that Gerald's camera system had been recording for 2 weeks. He didn't know that I had documentation of every conversation, every text, every voicemail, going back 14 months. He didn't know that Sophie had already filed a civil complaint that was waiting, pending, with a court date set for 6 weeks out. And he didn't know that the building, my studio, the converted warehouse I had leased and restored and loved, had a specific zoning classification that required a permitted change of use application for any transition from design, creative, to commercial, consultancy. That application had never been filed. Not by Derek, not by his contractors, not by anyone. The zoning issue wasn't something I discovered secretly. It was simply part of what any licensed architect knows about their own building. I had filed the correct permits when I moved in. Derek had not filed anything, because Derek had assumed the space was already his. He assumed wrong. Derek sent me a text the night before his grand opening. It said, "The studio looks incredible. I know this has been a process, but I really hope you can see that this is better for everyone. I'm hosting the launch Thursday at 6. You're welcome to come." I read it twice. I texted back, "I'll be watching." He probably thought that was sentimental. A softening. A hint that I was coming around. Thursday afternoon, 4 hours before Derek's launch event, the city's zoning compliance office received an anonymous tip about an unpermitted change of use at a commercial address in the warehouse district. I will not confirm or deny whether I made that call. What I will tell you is that the tip was accurate, it was documented, and it included photographs. Derek's launch event started at 6. By 6:40, there were 2 city compliance officers at the door. I know this because one of the developers Derek had cold called, the blunt one, who had warned me about the pitch deck, was actually there, out of curiosity, and he texted me a photo with the caption, "You knew, didn't you?" I was at home. I had a glass of wine. I texted back. I let the building speak for itself. The compliance officers issued a stop-use order. The event ended. Derek's 15 guests, including 2 people he had pitched as anchor clients, watched a city official tape a notice to the front door of what Derek had told them was his thriving new consultancy. Derek called me at 8:17 that night. He did not speak for a moment when I picked up. Then he said, "You did this." I said, "The city did that. You did it first." He said, "I'm going to fight this." I said, "Derek, Sophie filed a civil complaint 6 weeks ago. You used my clients, my name, and my portfolio without my consent. You illegally accessed my studio with a copied key. You performed unpermitted construction in a commercial space. Gerald has 2 weeks of camera footage. The court date is in 4 weeks. I have everything." He was quiet. I said, "You wanted the space. You're welcome to it. You just have to explain to a judge how you got there." The civil case settled before it went to trial. Derek's attorney, once he reviewed Sophie's documentation, advised him very strongly not to go before a judge. The settlement required Derek to vacate the premises immediately, pay for full restoration of my studio to its prior condition, and pay a separate damages amount for the misappropriation of my professional identity and client relationships. My parents' role in this became relevant during the settlement negotiations in a way that I had not anticipated but perhaps should have. In their enthusiasm to help Derek, they had co-signed a contractor agreement for the studio renovation. When Derek's financial situation became clear, he did not have the funds for the damages or the restoration that co-signature made them jointly liable for a portion. I did not pursue my parents aggressively. That was my choice. But the co-signature meant that there were real financial consequences they could not insulate themselves from. The amount was not trivial. My mother called me when she understood what had happened. She cried. She said she hadn't understood what she was signing. I believe her. Actually, I don't think my mother understood the legal weight of what she did. I think she signed because Derek asked her to, and because she has been signing things Derek asked her to since he was 23 years old. I said, "Mom, I told you in March. I told you in June. I told you in September. I gave you every chance to stop this." She said she was sorry. I said I believed her. I did not say it was okay. Because it wasn't okay. It was a 1.5 years of my life, and my people's lives, Renata, Cal, Priya, and my client's patience, and my attorney's time, and my own sleep. It was not okay. But my mother was sorry, and I understood the difference between the two things. The studio reopened 6 weeks after the settlement. The restoration took longer than expected, because Derek's contractors had done some structural things I was not happy about, but we fixed them. I repainted the front door myself again. It felt right to do that. Priya organized a small reopening for our clients and collaborators. Renata made a toast. Cal, who is generally reserved, said something that made 3 people cry. The blunt developer came. He brought a bottle of very good wine and told me. I almost took a meeting with him. "I'm glad I called you first." I thanked him. We have since completed a project together. Derek, as far as I know, is working for a property management company in a salaried role. I genuinely wish him well. Not in a performed way. I think structure might be good for him. I think he was never served well by the belief that vision without accountability is the same thing as work. My parents and I are still in contact. Sunday calls have resumed, though they are different now. Shorter, in some ways. More honest, in other ways. My father told me 6 months after the settlement that he had always known I would be fine, and I thought about whether that was a comfort or an insult, and decided it was probably both. What I want to tell you if you are watching this, because something similar is happening to you, or happened to you, or you are afraid it will, is this. There is a kind of fight where you win by swinging, and there is a kind of fight where you win by building your record so completely that the other person's actions become their own argument against them. The second kind takes longer. It is much harder. It requires you to stand very still while someone dismantles something you love, and to trust that what you've built underneath the documentation, the relationships, the legal groundwork is stronger than what they're tearing down on the surface. I did not always trust that. There were nights when I sat in my car outside the warehouse and looked at Derek's logo on my wall, through my own window, and felt something very close to giving up. But I had Priya. I had Sophie. I had Gerald, who chose 30 years of professional integrity over a cash offer. I had Renata and Cal, who showed up every day and never once asked me if we were going to be okay, because I think they already knew. I had a contract I had written carefully, 6 years ago, on a Sunday afternoon while eating a gas station sandwich. That contract held. Everything I had built underneath held. You wanted the space. You own the consequences.